A small business owner, Daniel Carter, refuses to join the HOA after uncovering its corruption. In retaliation, the HOA destroys his property, including his BMW, the result of years of hard work. Can Daniel expose the truth and protect his family from this ruthless force? What do you think about powerful organizations controlling people's lives? Leave a comment below. Daniel Carter's sleek silver BMW, the product of over a decade of relentless effort, is now nothing more than a heap of scrap metal. Deep dents cover the body, as if someone had mercilessly beaten it with an iron rod. The windshield is shattered, its fragments gleaming under the dim streetlights. The hood is smeared with hastily sprayed red paint, the dripping letters resembling streaks of blood. Do not defy the HOA. Daniel stands frozen, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turn white. He knows this isn't some random act of vandalism. This is a warning. A brutal, blatant message from the people who control this neighborhood, the HOA. The stench of gasoline and paint fills his nostrils, but the rage burning inside him is far stronger than any chemical fumes. It's not just anger, it's frustration. Not because of the car. That BMW was a symbol of years of struggle. It wasn't just a means of transportation, it was proof that he had overcome countless hardships to raise his daughters and stand his ground against life's challenges. But now, they had destroyed it, without hesitation. Daniel isn't afraid of losing possessions. He can buy another car. But what truly unsettles him is the message behind this act. If they dared to do this right outside his home, what would they do next? The night wind rustles through the trees, carrying the distant sound of a lone dog barking. The neighborhood is eerily quiet. Daniel glances around, his gaze sweeping over the darkened houses. The windows are dark, but he knows their eyes watching. Neighbors silently observing, but not daring to intervene. Because they know what happens to those who get involved. Daniel takes a deep breath and turns away from the wreckage, looking toward the small house where his daughters sleep peacefully. Inside, his eldest daughter, Emma, is probably still clutching the old teddy bear her mother left behind. The 8-year-old doesn't yet know how cruel the world can be. Olivia, just 5 years old, is likely dreaming of the fairy tales he told her last night. In her world, justice always triumphs, good people are always protected, and villains are always punished in the end. He cannot let them take that dream away. He cannot back down. Because if he gives in, his daughters will grow up in a world where the wicked hold all the power. Daniel Carter never imagined he would find himself standing against an organization like the HOA. He was just a small business owner, trying to make an honest living to provide for his 2 daughters. His neighborhood seemed peaceful, well-manicured lawns, neatly painted fences, and clean streets. But beneath that perfect surface lay a dark truth. The Homeowners Association controlled everything. On paper, they were a community organization meant to uphold order and protect residents' interests. But in reality, they were nothing more than power-hungry enforcers, using a web of regulations to extort and manipulate. They charged outrageous fees, issued heavy fines for trivial infractions. A tree planted in the wrong spot? $500. A paint color that wasn't HOA approved? $1,000. And if anyone resisted, they used underhanded tactics, constant warning letters, legal threats, even property sabotage. Daniel thought he could ignore them. Since his wife passed away, all he wanted was a quiet life, focused on his business and raising his girls. He worked from dawn until midnight, just to build a stable future for them. But then the HOA came for him. They demanded an unreasonable fee, what they called a neighborhood maintenance charge, despite never having done anything beyond sending threatening letters to his neighbors. At first, he politely explained that he couldn't pay such an absurd amount. They didn't care. A week later, he received a legal threat, accusing him of violating HOA regulations for placing his trash bin in the wrong spot the previous Tuesday. This time, he responded with just one word: no. He didn't realize that from that moment on, he had become their enemy. The crunch of shattered glass beneath his feet pulls Daniel back to a long-buried memory. As a child, he had watched his father be falsely convicted. A faded but haunting memory, one he had tried to forget for years. That day, the courtroom was cold, the air thick with the scent of old paper and cheap perfume. Daniel stood there, gripping his mother's frail hand, his wide eyes locked on the defendant's stand. His father, Frank Carter, a man of honesty and integrity, had dared to expose corruption. He had believed in justice. He had been wrong. The people he stood against weren't ordinary criminals. They had power, wealth, and the law in their pocket. They framed him, fabricated false charges, and turned an innocent man into a convicted criminal in the eyes of the entire town. Daniel remembers the moment his father was sentenced. There was no shock on Frank Carter's face, only a deep, profound disappointment, not for himself, but for the system he had once trusted. As the guards dragged him away, Daniel had cried out, "Dad," but his father only turned back for a second, offering a weak smile, as if to say everything would be okay. But nothing was ever okay again. Frank Carter was imprisoned, his reputation destroyed, his life stolen. Daniel's family was ruined. His mother worked multiple jobs to survive. He grew up with bitterness in his heart, but he had tried to move on. He had tried to live a normal life. But now, standing before his wrecked BMW, staring at the red-painted threat, he realizes a horrifying truth. The HOA isn't just another corrupt organization. They are part of the same force that once destroyed his father. They still exist. They still abuse their power. And this time, they've come for him. Daniel refuses to pay. He refuses to submit. He had hoped the car vandalism was just a scare tactic, a warning. But the HOA doesn't stop. They escalate the war, tightening their grip, step by step, closing in around him. The dirty tricks begin. First, Daniel started receiving fake invoices from the HOA with absurdly high amounts. Street maintenance fee, $3,500. Non-compliance penalty, $2,000. Legal fees, $5,800. A total of nearly $12,000. An amount far beyond what a small business owner like him could afford. Daniel compared these charges against the HOA regulations. None of them were legitimate. He sent a formal dispute letter. They ignored it. He called. They didn't answer. Then came the rumors. False accusations spread faster than wildfire. One day, when picking up his daughters from school, he noticed the strange looks from neighbors. An elderly woman who used to greet him every morning now turned away. A man who once borrowed his lawnmower suddenly refused to make eye contact. Then he found a post in the neighborhood's online group. Daniel Carter owes thousands to the HOA and refuses to pay. He's trying to dodge his responsibilities. Everyone follows the rules. Why does he think he's special? Daniel clenched his fists. This was no longer just a minor dispute. They were trying to isolate him. Mike was the only neighbor who dared to stand with Daniel. A quiet but honest man, Mike had been a police officer before retiring after a scandal he refused to talk about. "I've seen them do this before," Mike had told Daniel after his car was vandalized. "Don't back down." But then, one morning, Mike was gone. No goodbyes. No one knew where he went. Some said he moved out overnight. Others claimed he was arrested for HOA violations. Daniel went to Mike's house. The door was locked. The mailbox was stuffed with unopened letters. The police? They didn't care. They said Mike left on his own. But Daniel didn't believe it. He now understood. This wasn't just a typical HOA dispute. This was a sophisticated corruption scheme. And if he wanted to live in peace, to protect his family, he couldn't just resist. He had to defeat them. Daniel knew he couldn't fight the HOA alone. They were too powerful, too well connected. But he also couldn't back down. He reached out to Ryan McCarthy, an old friend and an experienced lawyer. Sitting across from Ryan in a small cafe, Daniel gripped his coffee cup tightly. "Ryan, I need you to investigate the HOA for me. I know they're operating illegally." Ryan sighed and shook his head. "Daniel, you can't win this." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan lowered his voice. "I've had clients go up against them before. Do you know why they still exist, despite everyone hating them? Because they have the local government in their pocket. This HOA isn't just a neighborhood association. It's a money-making machine, a corruption network that reaches all the way to City Hall. If you fight them, you'll be going up against people with real power." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Mark Reynolds. I've been watching this HOA for a long time. Looks like we have a common enemy." Daniel looked at Ryan. "Do you know a federal investigator named Mark Reynolds?" Ryan thought for a moment. "I've heard of him. Tough guy. Specializes in large-scale corruption cases. If he's reaching out to you, it means this HOA is into something way bigger than we thought." Daniel wasn't ready to trust him just yet. But when Mark sent over a file, he knew this might be his only chance. Inside were confidential documents, evidence of dozens of fraud schemes, embezzled HOA funds, and bribes flowing to local officials. And among those documents, one name made Daniel freeze. Judge Margaret Jessica. The same woman who wrongfully convicted his father years ago. Daniel gripped his phone. Everything that happened to his father was happening to him now. But this time, he wouldn't let them win. Daniel knew he needed a decisive strike. The HOA had ruled unchecked for too long, and Frank Holloway, the man at the top, had to fall. With Mark Reynolds' help, Daniel arranged a secret meeting with Frank Holloway at an upscale restaurant. Daniel pretended to surrender, acting as though he was willing to cooperate to avoid trouble. Beforehand, Mark gave him a tiny recording device that transmitted directly to a federal investigation team monitoring nearby. "Make him say everything we need, then leave the rest to us." Daniel nodded. This was the final battle. Frank Holloway lounged in a VIP booth, swirling a glass of red wine. He smirked as Daniel entered. "I knew you'd come. They all do. Sooner or later, everyone gives in." Daniel sat down, pretending to hesitate. "I just want peace. I'll pay, but I need assurances that this stops." Frank scoffed. "Stop? You think you have a choice?" He leaned back, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You don't understand the game, Daniel. You think the law will save you? I own the cops. I own the judges. I've sent plenty of people to jail just for refusing to play along." Daniel stared into his eyes, suppressing his rage. This was the moment. "Like my father?" Frank's smirk vanished. The room fell eerily silent. He opened his mouth, to deny, to threaten, but it was too late. The door burst open. Federal agents swarmed in, guns drawn. Mark Reynolds stepped forward, flashing his FBI badge. "Frank Holloway, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and bribery." Frank panicked. This is a setup." Mark smirked. "Exactly." Daniel watched as Frank was handcuffed, his furious eyes burning with hatred. But this time, justice had won. Months after the final confrontation, a series of federal investigations were launched. The once untouchable HOA was exposed. The secret documents collected by Mark Reynolds and his team were presented in court. Fraud, extortion, bribery, one crime after another was laid bare. Frank Holloway was sentenced to a long prison term. The HOA's top members didn't escape justice either. With government intervention, the oppressive HOA laws were abolished. The residents, who had lived in fear, took back control of their community. Daniel never sought fame for what he did. He didn't want praise or recognition. He just wanted to live a peaceful life with his two daughters. But as he walked through the streets once ruled by the HOA's iron fist, the grateful looks from his neighbors reminded him of one thing. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. Daniel sat on his porch, watching his daughters play in the golden evening light. A gentle breeze carried a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. One of his daughters ran up to him, eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, what should I do if someone bullies me?" Daniel smiled softly, brushing her hair back. He thought of the pain of his father's wrongful conviction, the struggle he had fought to forget, and the battle he had just won. At last, he understood. Justice only exists when people are willing to stand up for it. Never stay silent, my love. When you know something is right, stand up and fight for it. A radio broadcast echoed from inside the house. The HOA corruption scandal has shaken the nation. A powerful, abusive organization has been dismantled, and numerous local officials are now under investigation. Residents can finally live without fear. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The fight was over, but the lessons would stay with him forever. He stood up, stepping inside, where his daughters waited. Outside, the world had changed, because he had fought to change it. Daniel's story is not just about a man fighting against injustice. It is a story of courage, of refusing to bow down to oppressive forces, and of the power of truth. Corrupt systems may grow powerful anywhere, but they are not invincible. As long as there are people willing to stand up and fight, justice will always have a chance to prevail. Daniel never wanted to be a hero. He only wanted to protect his family and stand by what is right. But through his actions, he brought about change, not just for himself, but for an entire community. Have you ever witnessed an abusive organization like this? Share your story below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Proud Stories for more tales of justice and courage.